Want some, get some. How about those friggin' Pirates?
Yes, I am a pirate.
You have to go with the Pirates because, of course, they have cannons and everything.
It's a pirate's life for me.
Be proud of who you are and what you are. You're Pirates.
It is a first down. Pirates.
Because when you're at East Carolina, you go for it every time. Or you don't coach at East Carolina, you don't come to East Carolina, you don't play at East Carolina with a weak heart. Write it.
I don't think I've ever been in a building as loud as that was. It was deafening in there.
We will get them on. I can promise you that.
Painted purple all night long in Eastern North Carolina.
You're watching The Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates.
Yeah. My heart is purple and gold. I'm a pirate down to my soul, and I don't back down, not at all. Find out when the cannons explode.
Welcome in to the Sports Objective as we hear myself and a great friend. I guess the guys, we'll see if they're coming. But hey, my dear friend, I was thinking back. I think it's 13 years now he's known me, put up with me, and he hasn't killed me yet. David Glenn from the NCSportsNetwork.com. David, man, DG, how are you?
I'm doing well, Dave, and I absolutely love that intro. So credit to you and your team for putting that together. I've been with you many, many times, but I don't remember that specific intro.
It's a new one.
First-class stuff, and you know I always enjoy joining you, so it's good to be with you again.
Absolutely. There's a lot to talk about. It's funny, we used to joke with each other about back at the studio about the off-season. There is no real off-season anymore, and I think it started about the time I met you with LeBron going from Cleveland to Miami, and that famous thing with Jim Gray. But a long time ago, 2010 to be exact, the summer of 2010, and all of a sudden it became the off season was the NBA free agency. One curveball I will give you, but it's basketball related. I know you're a Philly guy, but I have to say, I was really happy with the Celtics winning for the sake of the NBA. I think that was great for basketball.
It is hard for me as a Philly guy to be happy when anything good happens to the Boston Celtics.
Yeah.
However, I'm okay with it. I mean, I still do root for the Sixers. I also root for the Hornets, although they're not very good very often since I've been down here. Heck, I've lived here for more than 35 years at this point. So I've adopted all the in-state teams. But it was great to see a town that loves a city that loves basketball as much as Boston does cash in again, because that's one of those cities where basketball is a front page story 52 weeks a year. And
right.
Nobody has won more NBA titles, I hate to say it, but it's true, than the Boston Celtics, who now have 18, and they had been stuck on 17 for a long time.
2009 or 9 or 10, somewhere around there. Last time they won one.
Was it? It might have been 8, but somebody could correct me on that. It's been way more than a decade, and the Celtics, way back under Red Auerbach, were cranking them out like chiclets, every year or almost every year. It felt like John Wooden was winning the NCAA titles at UCLA. It was crazy. I have a hard time smiling about the Celtics news, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I was a Celtics fan before the Hornets, and because we had no team, and I was a huge fan of those guys back in the day with like Larry Bird and McHale and Robert Parrish. What's funny is when you're a kid, like my son now, Alex, you can name every single player on just about every team, and now I'm lucky to know a handful of guys because I have more to life than just a basketball, learning about the NBA. However, I think, to fairness to me, these video games are amazing now, where my son will say, with MLB The Show, "Dad, do you know the shortstop for the San Diego Padres?" And I'm like, no, I'm lucky to know a Padre. But anyway, with YouTube and all the technology now, it's easy to see and understand why they know so much more than I'll ever know, for sure. As far as one of the reasons we want to have you on tonight is to help me understand. I'm trying really, really hard to understand. I've been at grips with this for almost 3 years, but still the NIL picture right now is really, really hard to wrap your head. Like what we talked about on the show numerous times with you is what we thought was unfair with NIL. You're selling merchandise. You got Johnny Football, who got in trouble years ago, maybe a decade ago, for signing autographs. I have no issues with that. I think that those guys definitely should get paid because they're a brand. The issue that I have now is, you and I you're a little bit older than I am, but back in the day with the Southwest Conference with SMU, those guys were doing it before it was legal to pay players. And so we know that it goes on, especially basketball, which you have a good grip on with ACC. There's guys getting money, we know, under the table and handshakes and different things. However, now it's just blatant. So we wanted to have you on because not only is the summertime, and I know you'll have probably your sabbatical at some point. So I want to reach you before the sabbatical.
Yeah,
I think it's in July. But as far as NIL is concerned and college football is concerned, that particular sport, how do we rein things back in? Is it too late for that? Is it like the toothpaste is already out of the tube?
We will not go backward. That part is true. We are in the midst of more change, though. And frankly, name, image, likeness has only been around for 3 years.
Right.
And within those 3 years, Dave, if you were, say, a compliance director at ECU or any other school, you would have had a hard time keeping up with what was legal and what was illegal when it comes to how college athletes receive name, image, likeness money.
Right.
One quick example. In January of this year, so 2024, Florida State football got in trouble, and an assistant coach at Florida State ended up getting personally penalized because he drove a recruit to the name, image, likeness collective of Florida State. And the rules at the time said that if you work at the school, you cannot participate in that. Name, image, likeness money does not right now come directly from the school.
Right.
Rules at the time also prevented coaches and other staff members from connecting the dots. You can't connect the high school or incoming player transfer maybe with the collective. Again, that's a third party. A lot of people get this confused. It is not the universities giving name, image, likeness money directly to their own players. That's not how it has worked for the last 3 years. It might be that starting as soon as next year, but it's not that yet. And the rules have changed frequently, but as recently in January, you could get in trouble as an assistant coach simply for driving that recruit or that incoming player to the collective just to have their conversation. And again, they're allowed to take that money from that collective. That's not illegal. But the fact that the coach brought them together was a violation, and then he lied about it and made things worse and ended up personally penalized in Florida State. It wasn't a big penalty, but the Seminoles got penalized because they violated the rules. Now, those rules have changed more than a dozen times in the 3 years that we've had name, image, likeness. But it's not going away. The details may change again, but you know the bottom line. When the NCAA tries to restrict what its players can get in most contexts, the NCAA gets sued and the NCAA loses. Why is that the case? Because folks just have to think about how it works in pro sports. Why is a professional athlete not allowed to pick his own team every year? Sounds like something we would want in America, right? Freedom. Why can't an NFL player say, I'm going to play for the Eagles this year, the Bills next year, the Patriots the year? Because lawyers on behalf of NFL Players Association negotiated with lawyers on behalf of NFL owners, and they adopted a system that both sides agreed to.
Right.
And when you agree as adults on a system, while both sides are represented by attorneys and you know what you're getting, well, then you can have an NFL draft that would otherwise be illegal. You can have to make a player wait for free agency, which otherwise would be illegal. Why is it not illegal? Because it was collectively bargained between a players association and a professional sports organization. There is no such collective bargaining in college sports. So the NCAA just imposes rules. They don't negotiate with anybody. They just tell you how it's going to be. Well, that was good in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. Little by little, they've been challenged on various rules that they've imposed. They've even gotten sued and lost when they tried to impose some restrictions on coaches. So the NCAA's track record in the court of law is almost as bad as the Washington Generals, who are paid to lose to the Harlem Globetrotters every time in entertaining basketball games. The NCAA doesn't always lose, but it usually loses, and its track record recently has been horrible. And in fact, if you've read about something called the House Settlement, that is going to change the way ECU and everybody does business. It was a lawsuit, and a judge has not approved of the settlement yet. But I believe that probably starting, not this upcoming academic year, but possibly starting the following academic year, 25 to 26, that universities will be allowed to funnel name, image, likeness money to their own players. Again,
wow.
It's been all third parties to this point.
Right.
It's Bob's Tractors paying the player for being on a billboard or pumping his stuff on social media or doing the autograph signing, which is legal now, right?
Right.
All sorts of things. You can even have your own clothing line now if you want to.
Right.
Starting possibly in the fall of 2025, I believe that NCAA schools are going to have the ability to funnel a certain percentage of their athletics revenue to their own athletes in the form of name, image, likeness money. And I can promise you that has not been allowed for these last 3 years that we've had it.
Right. So let me ask you that, and I'll come back to speaking of the NCAA with the Supreme Court. I got something for you on that. But as far as that's concerned, so let's say the East Carolina with the Pirate Club. Are you saying the Pirate Club would be able to do the NIL money? That's something that we've wanted. Is that something we'll be able to do?
It would be the athletic department itself.
Okay.
Internally. So it's a little complicated. And again, it's not done yet. There's a proposal in front of a federal judge right now that both sides have agreed to, but the judge still has to say yes and sign off on this new system. It's hard to describe in a small amount of words, but basically, roughly 20%. I don't know ECU's athletics budget off the top of my head.
It's 45, 50 million. I think Bubba and is
let's call it 50 million just for the sake of argument. Okay.
Okay.
20% of a university's, not the entire athletic budget. This is where it gets complicated. 20% of certain revenues, like your media rights revenue, royalty type revenues, but not booster donations. That's actually a different category. 20% of certain revenues will be saved, or up to 20%. It's going to be up to the individual universities whether they want to spend this NIL money all the way to the 20% mark. It might end up at 22%. Again, these things are still being discussed. But for the first time ever, ECU's own athletic department, 20% of 50 million is 10 million. ECU would have the right to spend $10 million of its own athletic department money on their own players.
Wow. So that would actually...
in the form of name, image, likeness, as long as this federal judge in California signs off on this House settlement. Again, it's not the law of the land yet, but it might become that starting in fall 2025.
And that may help those of us that are on the bubble, if you will, with power schools. We are so close. We can maybe so close, but yet so far away when it comes to the Atlantic Coast Conference, which you know very well, and the SEC. There was a rumor going around. I mentioned to you a couple months ago about ACC may be having East Carolina as like a fallback plan if North Carolina. It was a whole bunch of teams would have to leave, and I told you that, and you said it was basically speculation back then.
Yeah, I mean, the only way the last thing in the world the Atlantic Coast Conference wants is more schools in North Carolina.
Right.
I mean, because part of the winning formula is spreading your teams out, right? The new Big Ten literally will go from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean.
Yep.
They're adding Oregon, Washington, Southern Cal, and UCLA. So the whole West Coast. They've already been in the Midwest. And about a decade or so ago, they added Rutgers, which is in New Jersey, touches the Atlantic Ocean, and Maryland, for example. So that's truly a nation. They're not seeking to add schools in the states where the Big Ten already has schools.
Right.
So that's what's been working against ECU, among other things. The ACC has 4 70-plus year members of the Atlantic Coast Conference in the state of North Carolina. So there is no way on God's green earth that another in-state school becomes a member of the ACC unless, as you said, if both state and Carolina, large public universities here in North Carolina, if they both left the ACC for other leagues, well, then anything is possible. At that point, the future of the ACC would be really hard to predict. We're not close to that, by the way. Florida State and Clemson are trying to get out of the ACC as we speak, but UNC and NC State are playing wait and see on those lawsuits like just about everybody else.
Yeah, going back to the Supreme Court really quick, it's amazing to me, and I tell people all the time, and you're a lawyer, but I love, obviously, I have a political science degree, and I'm a town commissioner, so don't hold that against me being a politician now. But I said, if you think the NCAA, how bad it is, I'll tell you how bad the NCAA is. Most of the time, the court is split 5-4, now 6-3, and pretty much party lines, if you want to say liberal, conservative, however you play that out. I said, the NCAA lost so bad, it was 9-0, 9-0 on NIL, 9-0. Let that sink in for you when you know the court is pretty much divided, but every single justice agreed with each other. And that hardly, how many cases does that happen, DG? It's not many.
No, not many at all, especially given the current makeup of the United States Supreme Court. And the reality, back when I started covering college sports in the late 1980s, there wasn't a lot of money to go around. There was the occasional $1 million a year coach,
right,
but that was only at the biggest schools and the biggest sports. Well, if you fast forward gradually, 20 years ago, there was not this extraordinary level of money being thrown around. The amount of the check that you received 20 years ago, even if you were a member of the ACC, which was the wealthiest conference in America at the time, it was only $10 or $12 million a year that you got from your conference office. Now, that is a lot of money in a lot of contexts, and that's 20 years ago, okay? $10 to $12 million a year. The size of that check that ACC schools get from the league office every year is over $40 million a year now.
Wow, yeah.
And in the Big Ten, it's over $50 million a year and rising. So that's a pretty dramatic change in 20 years. And what does it bring? It brings a lot of lawyers sniffing around because the size of the pie in college sports keeps growing. What was 10 to 12 million a year in that annual check from your conference 20 years ago is now 40, 50, almost 60 per year per school. If the players were still getting mostly room, board, and tuition, which is what they got in like 1950, there's going to be a lot of people asking a lot of legal questions about how you came up with this system and whether it's legal or not. And of course, for reasons that I explained before, if you want to just impose your will in a mega billion-dollar industry and make up the rules it's powerful people who run these universities that are members of the NCAA, and it's powerful people who run the NCAA, and they just get to make up the rules for the most part about what these 18 to 21-year-olds, 24-year-olds now, the rules they have to play by. And in our country, it just doesn't work that way. At some point, whether you call it a union or collective bargaining, you don't have to use those terms if you don't want to. But at some point, there's going to be a negotiated new framework for college athletics. And as I've explained to you and your audience in the past, the NCAA went from 100 years of telling the United States Congress to stay out of their business. They don't need your help, Congress, to the last 3 years begging Congress to approve a new system for the future of college sports. Why does the NCAA want Congress to do it? Because if Congress imposes a system, the NCAA feels better about not getting sued. They just say, "Oh, we're not doing anything wrong. Congress approved this new framework." Of course, the United States Congress is somewhat divided, understatement.
Oh yeah.
Just as the Supreme Court is somewhat divided, understatement. So that is not going to happen anytime soon, and that means that this House settlement is probably going to be the replacement for an act of Congress. Again, a federal judge is being asked to approve essentially the framework for the future of college sports. And again, it looks like these athletes they are going to get a bigger slice of the pie. We're just not sure in what form it's going to take.
It's very complicated, but I have a lot of people that I've explained, for example, right now, it's a really hard ask. And here's what I'm going with that. So you have people like me and a lot of people watching this show and listening to our podcast who are buying season tickets, okay, members of the Pirate Club. You have a $60 million ambitious campaign, which we finally are doing, thankfully, which includes the indoor practice facility. It has upgrades to Minges, which they've already done, to the basketball coliseum, the baseball expansion, which we're about $500,000 if we can get some David Glenn's money. Or your son Anthony, I'm sure he has a lot of money just being a recent graduate in the last couple of years. But anyway, that's about $500,000 away. But my point is, and then you have NIL, which are great friends at Team Boneyard with Hank Hinton and Henry Hinton and all of them. You're looking at 4 buckets right now.
Yeah.
4 buckets. And if you include, there's a spinoff of Team Boneyard, Team 23. That's great because it's baseball only for Cliff Godwin and company. But you're looking at potentially, you could argue, 5 buckets. So that's the really hard part I have, is that I want everyone to understand is that at some point, when is enough? Because most of my entertainment dollars go to East Carolina. I've cut out tremendously, especially the biggest thing that suffered is I love to go to the movies, but the movies are so expensive now. Sorry, movie theaters, but I put all my money towards ECU. But when is enough? When those of us who are middle class, I'm only rich in name. I'm not a rich dude, which I'm not $1 million donor. But I'm giving a lot of my income to East Carolina, and I'm not the only one. So I'm not saying DG, I'm the only one, but when does that stop?
It doesn't stop, really. These schools are not going to ask for less from their supporters. At some point, universities are going to have to decide, and this actually has happened throughout history occasionally. Universities will have to decide what role they want athletics to play on their campus. And the sad reality is that if you're not at a school with lots and lots of people willing to reach into their pockets, and sometimes, you know how this works, Dave. I don't have a working knowledge of how many, billionaires there are who are products of ECU academically.
There's
or
one.
Are supporters of the Pirates. I don't know how long that list is.
It's not many, but I'll tell you one that graduated and played football, and that's Vince McMahon. He
came to mind for me as well. Now, I don't know off the top of my head that number at Alabama or UNC or Michigan or any Ohio State or these other schools either. But the bottom line is the SEC and the Big Ten are making such extreme amounts of money, mainly through their media rights deals, and those dollars have gone way up, as I described, just within the last 20 years. And now the playoff is expanding, and that's even more money for mostly the power conferences, right, as they're called. And this is another genie that you can't put back in the bottle. Eventually, everybody, a Wake Forest in the Atlantic Coast Conference has a chance of being left behind if Florida State and Clemson and maybe someday UNC and others leave for either the Big Ten or the SEC. There's a chance, Dave, that we're evolving toward a world in college sports where there's 2 or 3 mega conferences. Mm-hmm. And just like long ago, schools had to decide, do I want to play, it used to be called 1A and 1AA football. It was two levels of commitment. It was two different. How many scholarships do you have? It was 85 at one level, and it was a lesser number at the next level. How much, how many fannies can you fit into your stadium? Are you going to get to the point where there's 100,000 seats in your football stadium, the way some schools already have? Or are you going to be okay at 50,000? And little by little, I'm not talking about in the next year or two, but over a longer horizon, schools are going to have to decide how far up that financial ladder they're willing to go as part of a university that, of course, was created for academic purposes, and athletics are only supposed to be one arm of that university. Well, that arm has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of the dollars, to the point where most schools have to charge fees to their students to help subsidize the athletic department.
We do at East Carolina, absolutely.
Right. Now, the wealthiest athletic departments are so wealthy, some of those schools don't charge their students $1 for that. And most schools that aren't in that upper echelon are charging millions of dollars, at least collectively, right? So the school has to make a philosophical decision. And as much as it's not fun to hear, because I know your heart is behind the Pirates and I know your dollars are behind the Pirates, when push comes to shove, this country and college sports can get extraordinarily capitalistic. And the bottom line capitalistic approach to something is, if you can't afford it, you can't have it. That's the bottom line. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's happy, sad, right, wrong, happy, sad, up, down, whatever.
Right.
If you don't have enough money, you can't play in one of the biggest leagues. And if your fans don't have enough money, then you can't pay coaches a certain amount, subsidize the athletic department with that third-party name, image, likeness money. When that new world is created that I described, where the athletic department itself is going to be able to funnel name, image, likeness money, that does not mean those third parties will stop. There will still be additional name, image, likeness money coming from outside. So,
wow.
ECU and schools like ECU need more people like you. They need more Vince McMahons who not only have the cash, but spend it on that school's athletics. These big schools, man, how did SMU get into the Atlantic Coast Conference? Largely because wealthy, insanely wealthy people subsidized it.
They raised how many million in days?
They just
like 30, 40 million. It's something crazy. I remember
their annual booster donations, and I'd have to double check this number. I don't want to, how I am about factual accuracy. I believe the number was $158 million, which was the largest of any university in the entire country. That's what SMU athletics raised from its booster donations, $158 million in a year. Now, it was an unusual year, as you mentioned. A lot of that was in conjunction with, hey, the ACC says we can come, but we're not allowed to take the ACC's media money for quite a while, which leaves a big gap in the budget. These mega gazillionaires essentially subsidized a university's jump from one league to another.
Yeah, you know what SMU stands for, right? Southern Millionaires University.
There you go.
So a lot of people thought it was
Tom Dundon, the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes hockey team in our backyard, is an SMU guy.
I did not. Well, now I know.
I guess he's technically not a North Carolinian, but if he were, he'd be one of the, couple dozen wealthiest people in this state.
I think there's 10 billionaires, 12.
It's in the 10 to 20 range, I think now.
Yeah. By the way, want to say hello to our good friend Justin Butts, who DG is a baseball. I know he's a baseball umpire, and I believe other umpires, but I always tell him I won't hold that against him because I'm kind of critical of officials. But I love you, Justin. You're the best. John White, this is a subject we've been talking about, and our good friend Bubba, who couldn't be with us tonight, he has a question for you about the U.S. Open. I'll get to that in a second. John says that 20% allowance at pass will send the super conferences way above the middle major schools. Big Ten and SEC will dominate. ACC goes away eventually. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Big Ten and the SEC are already the wealthiest. but they don't dominate in everything. For example, the NCAA baseball championship was just held, and the mighty Big Ten didn't do squat.
Right.
They're often completely irrelevant in the sport of baseball. And oh, by the way, they almost never win the NCAA men's basketball tournament either. That's a pretty important sport. The SEC, of course, has been king in football. So my main point is just being wealthier doesn't automatically make you better, but it helps, right? I mean, the ACC hasn't stopped winning national championships, even as it has fallen behind financially. And that's not my opinion. You can just do your own research and see, it was Virginia winning the NCAA title in basketball, and then it was Carolina, and it was Duke. I mean, that's 3 of the last however many just from the ACC in basketball. And oh, by the way, Clemson has 2, Florida State has 1 NCAA title in the last decade plus. So that's the ACC in a very important sport, football, just within the last, dozen years at this point, where the ACC has 3 national titles in that sport, among many others. So it's not as simple as the richest always win the most, but over time, of course it matters, and the gap is growing. In terms of the future of the ACC, Florida State's going to leave. That part is not a question. It's what does it cost Florida State to leave? How do these arguments? How does the argument go over the exit fee, which is one number, and how does the argument go about the grant of rights, which is an even bigger number? And those lawsuits are playing out as we speak. I don't think it's likely that they're going to get to leave for a small amount of money. The Florida State and Clemson fans telling you they're going to leave for nothing are delusional and uninformed, and they have really bad sources of information. It's not going to be that easy to leave. Now, it might not be the $400 million plus to leave either. The lawyers are battling that out. But Florida State could leave, probably for the Big Ten, once they get their legal mess figured out and the cost of departure figured out. It's not as simple for everybody else because remember, the Big Ten and the SEC are in a league of their own. The Big 12 is in a very similar predicament as the ACC. Obviously, the Pac-12 just imploded, doesn't exist anymore. So there's 2 leagues at the top, and they're kind of making all the rules to a degree. And then there's the ACC and the Big 12 on a second tier. And then there's everybody else far below that. So maybe the ACC disappears, but maybe it doesn't disappear. It's not that clear yet because remember, the Big 10 and the SEC have to decide how big do they want to be. And you don't just invite schools just to get bigger. Why would the Big 10 invite Florida State? Because Florida State can make them money. The Big 10 is not yet in the very populous state of Florida.
Right.
And Florida State has a very good football brand and a great following and good TV numbers. So Florida State can bring more to the table for the Big 10 than it would cost as another mouth to feed. The people predicting total doom and chaos don't realize that there are not a lot of schools that would make more money for the SEC or for the Big 10 than they would cost as another mouth to feed.
Right.
So, I mean, UNC would get an invitation from either the Big 10 or the SEC. Again, it's new geography, a very strong sports brand.
Academics.
And academics help, absolutely, especially with the Big 10. And Clemson is a good football brand. So maybe the Tigers get an invitation. But it's not as simple as most people think. You start to run out of money at some point. Again, like the SEC is already in South Carolina and Florida. It's not as huge of a TV boost if the Seminoles or the Tigers join the SEC because the SEC already has the Gamecocks and the Gators in those same states. So, yeah, you'd be adding 2 big football brands. But for now, the SEC seems very happy at 16 schools. And I do think the Big 10 is going to get bigger. It's about to go to 18 in the next few weeks. And I think Florida State is going to become number 19 in the Big 10 at some point. Again, it could be a year away, 2 years away, whenever the legal stuff plays out. Who does the Big 10 go for number 20? We all know they would love Notre Dame, but Notre Dame does not appear to be willing to give up its football independence. So do they offer Clemson as number 20? Do they offer North Carolina as number 20? I think there's a chance they offer Texas A&M, trying to lure Texas A&M away from the SEC to become number 20. Why? Big new state. Plus, the Aggies hate the fact that the SEC just invited the Texas Longhorns.
Right.
And we all know the Aggies would not want that, and they didn't think it would ever happen. And they probably had conversations a decade ago. Hey, if we come to the SEC, you guys are never going to invite the Longhorns, are you? And they're probably told, no, we don't see that on the horizon at all. And maybe that was the honest answer at the time. Well, fast forward, the Aggies sure as heck didn't vote to bring Texas into the SEC. And that's why some people believe the Aggies would listen if the Big Ten, and again, put yourself in the Big Ten shoes. How do we get even richer? Well, the Seminoles are good in football and a new, very populous state. Texas A&M has a pretty good track record in football, and they're in another most populous state. So you'd go from the Big Ten already controlling the Midwest to adding the 3 most populous states in the country, which matters for purposes of TV eyeballs. You're adding California with UCLA and Southern Cal already. They're coming in this summer. You'd be adding Florida in the form of the Seminoles. You'd be adding Texas in the form of the Texas A&M Aggies. You want the dream lineup for Big Ten, even if you pretend Notre Dame stays out there in football independent land. The dream lineup is someday, again, Florida State would be number 19. Texas A&M or UNC would be their dream number 20. And then they'd have to decide how much bigger they want to get. Just as the SEC at some point has to decide if they want to get bigger than 16 schools. But it doesn't mean the ACC and the Big 12 disappear. It doesn't. That doesn't automatically happen. But there could come a time where those 2 wealthiest leagues try to have their own championship if they find the right TV partners for that, right? Again, none of that's happening in the near future. I'm just playing it out, well down the line and even into the next decade.
I'm going to come back to football, but Bubba has a Pinehurst question with the U.S. Open real quick. He said, hey, DG, did you attend the U.S. Open? What was your take on the excellent finish with Rory and Bryson, plus the event as a whole? I heard many talking about how they wish it was played at Pinehurst more.
I was there briefly. The good news is our state has gone from never hosting the U.S. Open, which was the case as recently as 1998, to now we have hosted 4 of the last 25 U.S. Opens. So I think that's correct. 1999 was the first. 2024 is the most recently. So what would that? Yeah, 4 of the last 26, we'll say. That's a great sign. And all 4 of those, by the way, were at Pinehurst number 2. And I do think Pinehurst number 2 will get more U.S. Opens. I don't know how quickly. But by the way, the PGA Championship is coming to Quail Hollow in Charlotte next year. So I think we've hosted 7 golf. Obviously, the Masters stays at Augusta National, so we'll never be able to host that. The British Open stays overseas, so we can't host that. So we only have 2 we can host. And I believe next year will be the 4th time we've hosted the PGA Championship. And we just hosted the U.S. Open for the 4th time. So I think that's great for the golf culture of a state that we all love so much. Pinehurst is essentially, for those who have been there or haven't been there, it's a village, right? It's not one of the 20 biggest cities in North Carolina. I mean, it's a fairly small place, and I loved the train from Raleigh to Pinehurst, which is
great.
It was only a temporary thing, but all the headaches that you can get with travel and traffic and parking, a lot of people in the Triangle area took advantage of that option.
It's only like $50 round trip, right, DG?
Correct. It was a very reasonable price, especially given what you would have had to pay for parking or whatever, right? So, I mean, it's almost a freebie when you add it all up, and nobody had to worry about driving, traffic, parking, headaches. You got off the train, and that walk was less than the length of a football field.
Wow.
Yeah. So you got to where, maybe not your final destination, but you got into the U.S. Open in a short walk getting off that train. So I loved the golf. There was a lot of North Carolina pride. There was a lot of chants of USA when a guy like, an American like Bryson DeChambeau, some don't like him because he went to Live Golf, but he is an American. And there were a lot of USA chants whenever he would do well. I thought the fans were overwhelmingly well behaved. At the Masters, they take your phone. At I don't know all the rules the USGA does at all sites, but at Pinehurst, they did not take your phone. So it does require people behaving, not drinking too much, turning off their phones to not distract the golfer, turning off the sound. And everything that I saw was very positive, and everything I heard from officials and golfers was very positive. And obviously, in the end, Bryson's going to be celebrated. Payne Stewart's celebrated to this day for his amazing finish in 1999 before his tragic death. And I think Bryson's going to be celebrated forever for that incredible sand shot and subsequent putt on number 18. And unfortunately, Rory McIlroy, a guy I really admire a lot as a person and as a golfer, unfortunately, he's going to be remembered for missing those two short putts on the final 3 holes. And, letting get away what would have been his first major title in over a decade, right? I mean, he's not an old guy, but, when you've gone more than a decade without winning a major, people start wondering if you're ever going to win another major. And that was as close as he has gotten, along with some other runner-up finishes. I just thought it was great for our state, great for the sport of golf. And I'm glad the U.S. Open comes to North Carolina because, guys, if you look at the list of U.S. Open venues, it is overloaded with courses in Massachusetts and New York State, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Wisconsin, even Northern California. Why? Because it's in the middle of June and it's hot in the South, right? So the U.S. Open doesn't want its golfers in Texas and Florida in mid-June, right? So they almost always pick northern courses. So I'm glad that they perceive us in North Carolina as far enough north that we get lumped in with Pennsylvania and New York and Massachusetts rather than getting lumped in with Texas and Florida, which they don't get to host U.S. Opens. So I'm glad we're seen that way, and I think that means we're going to continue to get the U.S. Open.
And just a sidebar really fast, I don't think Louisville is going to be hosting any PGA Championship anytime soon.
Probably not. That was not well run.
No, not at all.
Scheffler disaster.
Yeah, here's one from John White, a great former pitcher, by the way, for the East Carolina Pirates. He said ESPN Analytics said any pro golfer had less than 1% chance of getting that sand shot within 4 feet.
I believe that. And I actually heard Bryson say earlier in his career, he's not scared by this type of shot, that type of shot, a bad lie, this. A lot of the things that gave other golfers their most serious nightmares did not bother Bryson as much. He was quoted long before the shot that you just referred to as saying his nightmare golf shot is being asked, and I can identify with this as a weekend warrior golfer. Sand shots are hard enough as it is, right? Like if you're just blasting out, I find that hard. I could probably scull it over the clubhouse 1 out of 10 times. But I might be close 1 out of 10 times, but I at least know what I'm trying to do. When you're asked to carry, Bryson said, my nightmare, this is again way before this year's U.S. Open, he said, my nightmare shot is being asked to carry a bunker swing 50 plus yards in the air and stop next to the pin. Well, what did he have to do? I don't know the exact yardage, but I believe the 1%. And that's 1% of pros, not just 1% of golfers, which says a lot about the extreme difficult nature of that shot, man. Unbelievable. He deserves it. And I know you guys saw this part if you're golf fans, but Bryson, let's put it bluntly. I'm from Philly. We speak bluntly. If you listed the 10 guys most known as jerks in the golf world over the last 10 years, Bryson's name would have been on that list.
Oh, wow.
In Pinehurst, and this has been an evolution, not a light switch change, but more of an accumulation of things. Bryson was as fan-friendly and kind, most golfers do not bop you. Like if Dave, if you and I and Bubba and everybody else and Kyle were holding our hands out, just for a little high five as the golfer's going from one green to the next tee. 9 times out of 10, they just don't like to do it. And I don't even blame them. They make their living with their hands and their wrists. I mean, imagine like just a bop gone wrong and you feel like I just injured, one of the 10 best players in the world. So I get it. And there's always kids reaching out for autographs and stuff like that. Bryson high-fived and bopped. I mean, it must have been hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people over the course of those 4 days, and many more during the practice rounds. And you might have seen on TV where he stopped to see the young man in a wheelchair. And what was that, the 17th hole or off the 17th or 16th green? I forget the exact detail, but 9 times out of 10, even if it's in a guy's heart, to say hello to this special needs young person, you're trying to win a golf tournament. You're trying to win a major. You're trying to change your future. And Bryson, in that environment, stopped and spoke to that young man and signed his cap and gave him a high five. And that was symbolic of how he handled people. He's not been great at handling the people part of being a professional athlete. And a lot of fellow PGA Tours pros would have called him one of the biggest jerks on the tour at various times in the last 10 years. You never know what's real and what's not real. Maybe cynics think it was all for show and a marketing person told Bryson he needed to behave differently. I'm not quite that cynical, so I'm just going to hope that the Bryson DeChambeau we saw win at Pinehurst, that's the real authentic personality of a young man who maybe realizes that he was not always his best self earlier in his career and is getting better at just the basics of how to treat people.
And also, as we bring in Kyle from LaGrange Barber, also, DG, the fact that he has a responsibility now because he's a champion is a whole different level, which is obvious to our listeners and viewers tonight. We're going to bring in Kyle from LaGrange Barber, who joins us. And now we'll shift back to college football. Our good friend Bubba, who couldn't be with us tonight, Bubba Rosenbaum. He has another question for you, DG. When Brett Yormark was hired, it was an outside-the-box hire by the Big 12. Discuss the recent news. It may soon become the All-State, meaning All-State Insurance, All-State Conference.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bubba. It's going to happen. I was asked maybe a decade ago when we were first starting to see the ACC fall behind financially, and the Big Ten and the SEC were signing new TV deals and just truly skyrocketing away from the Big Ten and the ACC and at the time the Pac-12. And I was asked, if you were John Swofford at the time, the ACC commissioner, Brett Yormark, in Bubba's question, is the current Big 12 commissioner. I was asked, what would you do to try to keep up financially? Well, you don't have a magic wand to make your football product better. For those who don't know, why do the SEC and the Big Ten make more money than everybody else TV-wise? Because more of their fans watch football. That's the starting point. I mean, you might say winning. Well, yes, but TV partners really don't care as much about wins and losses. They care about how many millions of people are watching your games. And it's not only Michigan and Ohio State fans watching a lot of football in the Big Ten. It is not only Alabama and LSU fans watching a lot of football. Like in certain markets, people live and die by college football. And that's, again, the starting point to understanding all of this financially is who watches the most college football? And the answer is the largest numbers are a whole bunch of alumni bases in the Big Ten and a whole bunch in the SEC. Why do I bring that up? Well, because you don't have a magic wand to upgrade your football product. You need to get creative. And whereas most things that are brand new cause people indigestion, most people I've ever met fundamentally dislike most change. So if I were the ACC commissioner and I said, let's sell the branding rights to the name of our conference the way 50 years ago people would have thought that was outrageous if you did it to your stadium. Well, now everybody accepts that. Of course, we're not going to call it Charlotte Stadium. We're going to call it Bank of America Stadium and get Bank of America to pay us a lot of money to put that name on the stadium. 100 years ago, there weren't sponsors for bowl names, right? It was the Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl. Well, now what is it? They all have a corporate name before, it's the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and Chick-fil-A pays millions of dollars for the right to that. So 10 years ago when I was asked this question, the two things that I said is, unless there's an NCAA rule against it, sell the rights to the name of the league. And unless there's an NCAA rule against it, start putting the names of advertisers on your jerseys.
Yes.
And I would have known people would hate me, right? What the heck is Glenn doing? Nobody's ever done that. The Big Ten's going to laugh at us. The SEC is going to laugh at us. This is non-traditional. We don't do the same stuff that, minor league baseball does or whatever. They'd find something to mock. And I'd say my response would have been, go ahead and mock me. I know people don't like change, but my answer raises us money. And we can look at the Big Ten and the SEC and say, oh, you want to stay on your high horse? You're too good to sell the name of your league. All right, I'll collect 10 or 20 or $30 million a year or whatever the number is to have, in Bubba's question, they're considering renaming the current Big 12, the All-State Conference or the All-State 12 or some combination of all that. I personally do not have a moral objection, ethical objection, philosophical objection. But again, I know many fans would hate the idea. I know some university presidents would hate the idea. Some athletic directors probably vote against it. Some are going to accuse you of selling your soul for the almighty dollar. And my response to that would be, we are drowning. We are falling so far behind these other leagues. We got to find something to do. So, the colleges already do have some commercialization on their uniforms, whether it's an Under Armour logo or a Nike logo, et cetera. But I don't have a philosophical objection to having advertising on college sports uniforms. And I don't have a philosophical objection to selling the name of your conference if that's what you want to do. If All-State's willing to spend X tens of millions of dollars per year to rename a league that's been around for a long time, more power to All-State, more power to the Big 12. I'm not losing any sleep over it. Again, I know a lot of people philosophically disagree with me on that, but whoever the ACC commissioner, Brett Yormark, is clearly not a traditionalist. And he's done some revolutionary things with the Big 12 already. So it doesn't surprise me that he's behind this idea to a degree. Most others in college athletics have at least a little traditionalist in them. And I don't know how ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips would feel walking into a room and saying, hey, come up with a fun hypothetical. Are you gonna rename it the Bojangles ACC or something like that? You would get pushback. I promise you that. But the same people who would philosophically fight you would be happy with the new revenue because if they pay enough for 1 year, the size of what they would pay for 10 years is an extremely large number, and it helps leagues like the Big 12 and the ACC keep up.
DG, I thought the show was at 8. It was at 7, so I arrived a bit late. I'm assuming you're about to go. I don't know what was discussed prior to me coming on, but primary thing that was on my mind, and I'm sure it's already been discussed, so going to be regurgitating things here, and I'm sure you're probably about to wrap it up anyway. But the whole situation with NIL. And where we are with NIL, we meaning college sports in general, and the so-called group of five, trying to fight a battle. And it's not just football anymore. At one time, it looked like it was just football. Now it's affecting not only basketball, but now it's affecting baseball.
Yeah.
I don't see how it can continue like this for the group of five. I really believe there's a split coming. And I think it's not just coming in football. I think it's going to come in all sports. I have my own thoughts on what's going to end up happening, but how far away do you think we are from seeing a split? Because it just, now that it's bleeding over to baseball, what's next? Volleyball?
Yeah. I don't think we're near a split in terms of the next couple of years. But there's a couple important forks in the road. One of them we discussed earlier, and that is there's a court case called the House case, and there's a proposed settlement that both sides have agreed on. So the plaintiffs representing former college athletes and current college athletes, but also colleges and universities / the NCAA. Both sides have agreed to this new world where for the first time, as long as a federal judge in California approves this settlement, universities will be able to basically funnel a percentage of their athletics revenue directly to their own athletes in the form of name, image, likeness money. Right now, all that money comes from third parties and collectives and boosters who own companies, et cetera. So that would be a massive fork in the road where universities are now essentially internally paying name, image, likeness money. And what's going to happen if that is accepted, universities are going to have very difficult decisions to make because not all universities can afford to funnel 20% of certain athletic revenues to their own athletes. And some are going to decide to invest mostly in football and men's basketball. There's some Title IX gender equity questions surrounding how the money could be distributed without violating the law. So we got more lawsuit headaches ahead along those lines. But I think your premise is right in that just a couple of times in college sports history, schools have been asked the fundamental question, what do you want athletics to be as a part of your overall university brand? And if folks want to do any quick research, look up the identity of a handful of schools that, I mean, like it probably was 80 to 100 years ago, were playing against Alabama. And the money started to grow to a point where, the University of Sewanee said, we don't like where this athletics thing is going. Yeah. And Sewanee, 80 or 100 years ago, downgraded. And a lot of the other schools Alabama was playing with and against decided to form the SEC. So just as there was a philosophical decision to be made back then, and some schools went what is now called D3. Some schools went D2. There was another, of course, App State not long ago had to decide whether they wanted to stay in FCS or jump to FBS with their football program. So we've seen philosophical decisions like this in the past, but with the money getting so big and getting it hard to keep up, I do think there's probably a world where some number, I don't know if that number is going to be 50 schools or 60 schools or something slightly larger than that, where they're going to have their championship and others are going to have a different championship because that tier 2 just either can't keep up financially or doesn't want to even try to keep up financially. And those decisions are not too far away. That new world I was describing with name, image, likeness money, again, for the first time, it would be allowed to be coming from the athletic department itself. The earliest that could start is the fall of 2025. And imagine, guys, what decisions are going to have to be made. Are we going to spend all the way to the cap? Do we have enough money to do that? How are we going to pay our coaches and upgrade our facilities with this new line item called name, image, likeness money to our own athletes? That could be $10 million a year at a school like ECU. That doesn't just come out of nowhere, right? So hard decisions have to be made, and there's going to be another round of conference realignment. And there may only be 2 or 3 mega conferences that play by that top set of rules.
I think it's going to be 3. I think it's going to be 3 leagues of 20.
Yeah, it could. It could.
I don't even know if there's enough people, but my question is, DG, and something.
I don't know if there's enough great schools for the third conference. I think the Big Ten and the SEC have most of the clout right now. And if the Big Ten wants to get to 24 someday, it can. And if SEC seems happy at 16 for right now, but could certainly get bigger if it wants to. Do they both go to 24?
My theory is the SEC and Big Ten are going to go to 20, and then the All-State Conference, as they are positioning themselves to survive, will then pick over what's left of the ACC and be the third 20-team league.
They will not be on the same tier as the SEC and the Big Ten. There is no world where they get the same kind of football TV numbers. because they're not going to get Florida State. FSU's not interested in the Big 12. It's going to be viewed as a second-tier league, whether it's the ACC or the Big 12. There's just the TV numbers are not there. And in fact, there aren't that many schools. Basically, if we all got together and made a list of the most desirable football properties, we all brainstormed 2 or 4 years ago. We would have listed Southern Cal, we would have listed UCLA, we listed Washington, we would have listed Oregon. They're all on their way to the Big Ten already. We would have listed Oklahoma, we would have listed Texas. They're on their way to the SEC right now. We would have listed Florida State. I think they're going to end up in the Big Ten in the next few years. Who else would we list? There's not that many schools left that would add more to the Big Ten or the SEC than they would take away as another mouth to feed. And again, I don't see any formulation of the Big 12 that will belong on the same pedestal as the Big Ten and the SEC. The TV people just do not view the Big 12 that way in football.
Well, I hope you're right. If it ends up being, 2 24-team leagues at the highest level, that's honestly better for East Carolina. The more schools that are left at this level, the better off. It's less painful if there's 48 versus 60 or more, and then we're left behind.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
Especially when a team like East Carolina, we were talking to EG, it's a bubble power school. We are right there at the cusp, I feel like. How do you get over the hump? How do you get off the bubble? Is just raise more money? Is that what it comes down to? Have leadership that really pushes that train? Drives that train?
Yeah, you got to pour money into your budgets. You got to create a product where there's a lot of demand. Obviously, media money has become far more important than a lot of other revenue categories these days, but you still have to sell a lot of tickets. That's still a pretty big revenue category at most schools. So if you're filling 100,000 seat football stadium, that's a lot different than filling a 50,000 seat football stadium.
Right.
ECU's distance from that top 48 might as well be 1,000 miles. ECU's distance from what we have described over the last decade as the Power 5, which is really now the Power 4 since the Pac-12 is gone, that's not as huge a gap.
Right.
But there is no way for ECU to get into the top 48 in the near future. There aren't enough people who watch Pirate games. TV partners have these numbers, right? And Florida State and Clemson have these astronomical numbers in terms of football TV audiences. Somebody like Notre Dame gets that big cash from NBC because it has, even in bad years, the Irish have astronomical TV. Obviously you can't lose too long or the numbers start dropping a lot, but
right.
They can mix great years with bad years and still have sensational TV numbers. The SEC, the overwhelming majority of those members, huge football TV numbers. The Big Ten, a lot of large public universities that have been around a lot longer than ECU has had. They've been churning out graduates in much larger numbers over a much longer time than a school like ECU has. So again, there's no magic wand there. You got to win, you got to sell tickets, and you got to become a brand that enamors people beyond your own fan base. That's the bottom line. It's not just Notre Dame fans that are watching Notre Dame football. They're a brand. It's not just Florida State fans watching Florida State football. They're a brand. And, if we see Alabama against Auburn in a particular year, I'm not a fan of Alabama or Auburn, but I might check out that game because of the brands. Why is Duke Carolina the most watched basketball game in the country almost every year? I'd be putting aside the NCAA tournament because of the brands. Now, some years they're both ranked in the top 5, and it's a no-brainer. But a lot of years they're not ranked in the top 5, or one or the other is not very good, and they still get astronomical, by basketball standards, astronomical TV audiences. And the ECU is just not in that place or particularly close to that place with its athletic brands right now. Doesn't mean it can't be a fantastic athletic department. Doesn't mean it can't be one of the dominant programs in the American Athletic Conference. But it's a long way from being a target of one of the top 4 conferences.
Yeah, and if it ends up being 48, I quite frankly say go ahead, take your ball, the 48 of you, go do your thing. But one thing, and I don't know how much more time you have, DG, but you talk about brands and people, watching Alabama, Auburn, and you don't care about either one of those schools, and UNC Duke, and it's the most watched basketball game. But I've always kind of looked at it like this too. While they're called Power Five, they're still right now playing at the same level as East Carolina or BYU, to use a Big 12 school, or whoever. I believe there's 133, correct me if I'm wrong, FBS schools right now.
Sounds
if,
right.
If you drop that down to 48, you're cutting off a lot of viewers, because I'm not going to watch that crap. I'm not going to watch Alabama Auburn anymore. I'm not going to watch whoever's at that level. I'm going to watch who's at our level. So that's one thing I do wonder how that's going to affect, as they're throwing out all this TV money, and now, they separate to the highest level. You're alienating a large part of your audience that I don't think they're thinking about that. I think they're not looking at it broad enough. They're really focusing in on, well, your SEC fans and your Big Ten fans, and everybody watches Alabama Auburn because it's Alabama Auburn and their brands. Yeah, but there's also an association. They're the same level as us theoretically, whether it's true or not, really. But as of right now, we're FBS, they're FBS. When that goes away, I'm going to quit watching them, and I'm just going to watch our level. And there's going to be a whole lot more at our level.
I think your point of view is heard. For example, everybody I know in the SEC tells me that they're content at 16 schools. Like they're not dying to expand right now in the Southeastern Conference. Now, you never say never. That doesn't mean they can't change their mind 1 year from now or 5 years from now. But they see that part of your point of view as a real thing. Now, there's somebody else in the room who always brings up, hey, a lot of fans told us they'd swear off ACC football and basketball when the league expanded. Well, I'm sure some people did, but most people did not.
I don't think it's comparable.
In fact, TV numbers keep growing and TV payments keep growing. There were baseball fans when, Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game out of Atlanta. There were probably millions of people who said, I'm never going to watch Major League Baseball again for political reasons. I can't believe they did this. I hate them. I'm never going to watch again. 99% of those people were lying. They didn't stop being baseball fans. They just were mad, wanted to let it out, and probably in the moment swore off baseball forever. 99% of them turned out to be liars. Because
but we're not swearing off college athletics. We're swearing off that level of college athletics if we're not involved in it anymore.
You may, but what will the masses do is what matters. The TV executives just don't care if they lose some when, for example, in the realignment expansion context, they were thinking, you know what, there's some traditionalists who are never going to watch this supersized ACC. But we as TV partners now have, instead of the old 8-team ACC, they have 14 football products to sell.
Right.
And they have a greater inventory and more high-profile matchups, et cetera. So the pluses outweighed the minuses. Didn't mean you didn't lose some people, but you added other people. And somebody in the room, just like somebody is saying your point of view, we better be careful about this sacred cow that we have created, because we're all making a ton of money right now. If it ain't broke, why try to fix it, right?
Oh, it is broke.
Somebody in the room is saying what you're saying, and that probably explains part of the reason the SEC remains happy at 16. I mean, they did just expand. Oklahoma and Texas are just arriving, but I don't sense that the SEC is dying to get past 16. So your point of view is being heard, but somebody else is saying, hey, when we create this mega league, we're going to have more casual fans watching us because they've got this 48-team monstrosity, and they want to see how that universe works. And maybe more fans of those 48 are more enamored than they were when they were just another league out there. I don't claim to know the answer, but both of those points of view, I promise you, are present in those conference conversations.
Here's the one thing I will argue. We were talking about pro sports, and I'm not making this pro versus college, but college football, if they would get their act together, could be the #1 sport in all of America. And the reason why the NFL is number one, because they know that it's about a brand. They're playing all over the world. They're playing games in London. There's a reason why they're playing all over the world. A lot of those teams hate to go to play those London games and down in Mexico City. And not that I have a problem with them playing it, but they don't like it, travel reasons and et cetera. The problem with college football, the reason why they don't have my respect is because they don't think globally. Kyle and I think you are, David, we're very big wrestling fans. It's like having the territory days. I'm just going to worry about Jim Crockett Promotions. I'm just going to worry about Mid-South. I'm just going to worry about — the problem is you got a guy like Vince McMahon out there that's going to be thinking globally, and that's what they need, is that commissioner. They need that guy to say, wait a minute, guys, if we have 64 teams, or we have this many teams in that big conference or that big level, if you want to call it.
You don't want 64, because then we're just going to be left out and there's going to be more.
No, I know. I'm just saying the more — he's talking about eyeballs. My feelings are exactly like Kyle's. I will not watch it because I think it's a disgrace. I think that when you look at the number of eyeballs that potentially could be on college football would outweigh any sport, including in the NFL, if they got their act together. The good news is for the NFL, the powers that be in college football have their own agenda, and they can say, well, David, I'm in charge of the SEC. But the big picture of things, if you're really in charge of the SEC, you should be saying, I want to expand college football and not contract it.
Well, it'll be interesting. One thing that'll be interesting, Dave, this year is, will Group of Five ratings go up this year, because Group of Five games now have an implication on the playoffs. The highest rated Group of Five champion is going to get a playoff spot this year.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see, does that create more interest in American Conference games? And by the way, since the Big 12 is going to sell their branding to Allstate, I think the Americans should go with the General. But just in general, will that create more interest in so-called Group of Five games? Talking about expanding viewership of college football overall. Now on Championship Saturday, the American or the Sun Belt or the Conference USA Championship with Liberty last year will have playoff implications for the first time ever.
I think it's going to help. Obviously, the massive revenue stream is simply what the college football world is being paid for the expanded playoff. But a secondary benefit to me is both what you just said about those conference championship games and other prominent Group of Five teams, but also I think there's a lot of fans of teams that maybe if they had 2 losses in the month of September, let's say, there's a percentage of fans who are going to be less interested in the rest of that season, because whether it was under the BCS format or the 4-team playoff, you knew you were done.
Yeah.
Like literally no 2-loss team ever made the college football playoff in 10 years. That's 40 teams. There were no examples. So what I think is going to happen, it's another layer to improve college football ratings generally, is there's more reasons for more fan bases to hang around longer, right? There's always the diehards, but the more casual fan, if their team loses a couple early, you're thinking I could still get in at 10-2 if I win my conference title, right? So there's a lot of benefits to that. You guys know the deal. And Dave, by the way, your NFL example, the highest revenue sports league in the history of the world is the current version of the National Football League. That's how good they are. And oh, by the way, whoever's number 2 and number 3 are not close to the NFL at all. It's actually baseball and the NBA are 2 and 3. And I mean, in the history of the world, their annual revenue numbers are that large. NFL over $20 billion a year. Baseball and the NBA are over $10 billion a year, but that's how far the drop is to number 2. College football collectively is insanely popular. One challenge that they have is that nobody's going to follow 130 plus teams, right?
Wow.
The NFL,
I wouldn't say nobody, DG.
Well, is there anybody like besides Phil Steele who really knows? And I know a lot of NFL fans who could tell you the starting quarterback for all 30 NFL teams, right? And they know a handful of players on all 32. There's nobody who knows college football is too large to be popular in the same way the NFL. It's not mere coincidence that all the most successful leagues have something in the neighborhood of 30 teams. It's a small enough number that you can have a familiarity with not only your favorite team, but the other 29 or the other 31. So it'll be interesting to see if that breakaway college football league, I mean, maybe they don't want to go all the way to 48. Maybe they don't. Maybe the Big Ten gets to 20 and the SEC is at 16 and those 36 say, let's do this. Let's do things our way. I don't know.
Even better. Do that. That's great. I'm all for that. Go ahead. Do that.
It probably won't be that small, but there is an advantage to being not quite as large because it allows for more people to truly care about the league as a whole. Whereas it's just impossible to care for about 130 some teams.
By the way, Robert Matthews, a friend of ours, he says, DG, I missed you on 99.5. You are the man.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. It's good to be missed. I can say this. I miss my listeners all the time. I miss my interns and my producers. I do not miss hosting an everyday radio show. And I say that as a man who's incredibly blessed that I've gotten paid to write and talk about sports for the last 40 years almost. I'm happy at this chapter of my life to doing what we do, at the North Carolina Sports Network. We just hit a huge threshold number. I don't know if Robert's a part of that, but we went past 10,000 YouTube subscribers in about 3 months. And 98% of YouTube channels never make it to 10,000. And we did it in 3 months. So a lot of people deserve thank yous from me and my staff because the North Carolina Sports Network is a small family-owned endeavor. And it's very, very hard to make it in today's media world as a small family. Other things I've done were backed by, the biggest TV company in North Carolina, the biggest radio company in North Carolina, ESPN is a partner. These are just massive conglomerates that have built-in advantages that whether you're a hardware store or a guy creating a sports media company, it's just harder to be the mom and pop approach. It's just harder. And I don't back away from that. I'm not complaining about that. It just is harder. So we're incredibly thankful for the feedback we've gotten on our website, our podcast, and the YouTube channel in particular, because that number started at 0. I've had a podcast for a long time. I've been a writer for a long time, but the YouTube channel is brand new. So thank you for the kind words, Robert, and thanks to everybody out there who's been supporting me. We're not even at a year yet with the North Carolina Sports Network, but whether you supported me 30 years ago or supporting this current endeavor, I try to be thankful every day for the people who like what we do and support what we do.
Congratulations on the success. How much more time do you have? I got an interesting question for you.
Yeah, I got a little bit more. My wife's waiting for me, but we've been married 26 years. I'll get away with it.
With your legal background, have you been keeping up with the Vince McMahon scandal at all, East Carolina alumni?
Only a little bit from afar. I have not dived into the details there.
Okay, just a general question. He was being sued, in a civil case, by a young lady for millions of dollars.
Right.
And she has now been asked to, I don't know what the legal term would be, but hold off on that because the feds are potentially going to indict him. When somebody is told on a civil case, hey, wait a minute, because we might be getting ready to indict him, we don't need evidence compromised. How likely is it that indictment is coming?
This is not my wheelhouse because that's pretty high level, civil litigation and criminal litigation, which is kind of above my pay grade. But I do know that generally speaking, you're wise to listen and you can actually benefit in your civil case by evidence generated by that federal case. Yeah. So,
and they did, they've paused litigation.
Yeah, it makes sense to pause. Let the big boys who have bigger resources than you do, who knows what unsavory information is going to come out of that if there is a prosecution. So I've read a little bit about those cases, but not enough to know, to have a great sense of where they're going to go.
And he has sold all his stocks.
Right.
Now has all, I guess it's all liquid, billions of dollars at his disposal. At this point, if I'm
Thanks to
Vince, I
Saudi
mean,
Arabia.
you just leave the country. I mean,
Give it to ECU. Hello.
That's not happening.
And
No, I just find it interesting. I would think if you're being told to, hey, hold off on that he's likely going to be indicted.
I think you're right. Your gut instincts on this are right.
one final question for you, because the lovely and talented Maria is waiting for you. So we'll let you, this will be the last call, last question. Bubba says, do you see Grayson McCall and NC State competing in the ACC? Also, how do you think Duke does in year one of Manny Diaz? Will this be the third straight excellent hire for a head coach for the Blue Devils? Of course, he's talking about David Cutcliffe, Mike Elko, and now Manny Diaz.
I don't love Duke in year one under Manny Diaz. I think the Blue Devils, in the aftermath of Mike Elko leaving for Texas A&M, probably lost as many high-profile, big-time starters as anybody in the entire ACC.
Wow.
And that was even before much of it was before Manny Diaz was even hired, where, their young quarterback, Riley Leonard, heads to Notre Dame. Their starting running back goes to NC State. Their all ACC defensive tackle jumps to Virginia Tech. I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh. So Manny's going to need a little while, but he's an impressive guy. So I think there is a good chance there could be a third straight impressive hire in Duke football, which was nothing for about 50 years, just a total disaster for almost literally a half century. The NC State question, I'm way more optimistic about the Wolfpack this year. McCall from Coastal Carolina was a multi-time Sun Belt Player of the Year. He gets plugged into the quarterback position, of course. Dave Doran has a really sound foundation. And I actually think, obviously, it's a different sized league now. There are 17 football teams in the ACC this fall. I think if we listed a top 5 that NC State would be in, everybody would put Florida State in that top 5. Everybody would put Clemson in that top 5. A lot of people believe the Miami Hurricanes are finally going to break through. We've heard that many, many, many times. Yeah. So I wouldn't count those chickens just yet. But I think it is legitimate when you look at the Wolfpack's depth chart, what they've signed on the incoming transfer portal. I think Louisville's going to be good again. I think Virginia Tech will be good. But the Wolfpack is in that mix. And they haven't broken through at the 10-win level yet under Dave Doran. That's one of their goals. State's only had one season in its history, 100-plus years of football, with 10 or more wins. It won't be easy. But I think it's a believable. I wouldn't laugh if Dave Doran said we're going to become the second Wolfpack team in history to win 10 or more games. I would understand why he would list that as a goal. Can they go 10-2 in the regular season? Would they need a bowl game to win that 10th game? Who knows? Or maybe they're being overestimated right now. But Dave Doran's a good football coach. And that's a nice nucleus of talent in Raleigh this year. And it's really one of the first times in a long one of the only times I can think of that I consider the Wolfpack not the ACC favorite, but right up there, call it tier 2 if you want, behind the heavyweights.
Well, that's a lot of people in Raleigh are very happy, and Wolfpack Nation to hear that. Before we let you go, obviously you talked a little bit about the North Carolina Sports Network. I know everybody sees on the screen, but if you're listening, at David Glenn Show, at the NC Sports Net, and of course, subscribe to their YouTube channel there for DG. But how else I guess that's the best way to find you right now.
Yeah, the social media, that you have them up there, so I thank you for that. The website is kind of our Grand Central station, and it is a little confusing because the website is ncsportsnetwork.com. So just think of North Carolina Sports Network, NC for North Carolina, sportsnetwork.com. Our social media is a little different with, as you said, Dave, with the NC Sports Net. But if you can remember NCsportsnetwork.com, Those who like to listen, like you literally click the word listen and it takes you to our podcast. If you like to watch, click literally the word watch and it takes you to our YouTube channel, which remember, for those who aren't familiar, subscribing is free. All these follows, all of these subscriptions are free. But those numbers help us for a lot of different reasons. And occasionally, we have found sponsors with my appearances all over the ACC area and all over the state of North Carolina. So I'll put it this way. It used to cost a lot of money to partner with the David Glenn Show. It's a much more manageable amount of money to partner with the North Carolina Sports Network, just because we're only in our first year of existence. So we have good numbers to show, but they're only 1 year worth of numbers rather than 20 some years worth of numbers. But yeah, that's the Grand Central Station, ncsportsnetwork.com. Everything about me. You can even send me an email. There's contact forms and email addresses at that website, and also davidglennshow.com.
Well, as we said at the beginning of the interview, you're a great friend. I appreciate you putting up with me 13 years. Hard to believe, a good luck number, like Taylor Swift would say. Appreciate you so much. Good luck again. I enjoy watching, listen to you on this different, I guess it's a new medium, just like streaming versus cable and over there. Thank you so much, and good luck to you. I hope you have a great sabbatical, and we'll try to get you on the other side right before ACC football starts.
Thank you, Dave. It's always good to be with you. I admire what you have done with the Sports Objective. I'll come back anytime. And after we do a little running around in July and early August, we'll dive deeper into the details of this upcoming college football season for sure.
All right, sounds good. Good night, my friend. Thank you so much. Appreciate the time tonight.
Thanks to everybody for watching and listening. See you next time.
Good night. Bye-bye. All right, that's the great DG, David Glenn, and let's bring back in Kyle from LaGrange Barber. What's up, dude?
Oh, not much, man. I just got knocked off the podcast there right at the end of the interview. But anyway, good catching up with DG. I missed the first half of the interview. I don't know how much NIL stuff and all that was discussed, but we got some of it in with him while I was there. Dave, if you don't quit doing that.
Okay, I'm trying, because
that's fine. That one right there, it's good. It's good.
All right. What worries me to death about the overlays. Love you, Bubba.
Anyway, that was distracting the hell out of me.
Sorry.
But anyway, it's we got a couple months to go before football season starts. One thing just to mention, if and buts and fruits and nuts and all that kind of stuff. But hey, preseason, the favorites to represent the so-called Group of Five in the college football playoff are Liberty, Appalachian State, and Memphis. We play two of those three. Oddly enough, the one we don't play is in our league because things are stupid. But what if we are way better than people think, and all of a sudden in the month of September we go 4-0 and beat two of the preseason favorites, and now we go through the conference and meet Memphis in the conference championship game. So, who knows? You could go from 2-10 to all of a sudden being in the playoff discussion. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
No, when you look at the schedule, you and I have talked about it. We're not trying to say that.
No, and I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just saying it could happen.
Well, I tell you what, I was talking to some folks this afternoon, and they were surprised about me being bullish on John David Baker. But unless there's just a, like we talk about the talent level and all that stuff, but I firmly believe they've done a much better job this year with the talent, the transfer portal, and you look at the.
Oh, we're talented we're talented everywhere. The only place I'm really concerned about talent is the O-line. Besides that, I think we're talented pretty much everywhere. They did a good job working the portal this year versus last year, and part of that was NIL, and part of it was changing philosophy and accepting things for the way they are, unfortunately. But John David Baker has a good pedigree, good reputation. Our O-line coach, people are really big on him and think he's fantastic. So maybe he can do something with the guys that are already here. Sometimes it takes coaching up. So we'll see. But it's just an interesting thought that for the first time ever, because of the new playoff format, and it probably won't last long, unfortunately. But if we were to win the American, and I don't think we will, but if we do, we would be in the playoff discussion. So
Here's should I ask this question? I don't know. Chuck will do it. I think I know Kyle's answer. You know what my answer is going to be, Chuck, or you should. What's your feelings on John Gilbert, our athletics director, scheduling Western Carolina?
I don't have a problem with it if the fourth game non-conference on the 2027 schedule is a quality opponent. If it's a so-called Power Five opponent or even an App State, we have Wake Forest coming to Greenville that year. So if it's an App State or Power Five opponent, then I don't have a problem with it. I don't mind one FCS opponent a year. Doesn't bother me. The problem with it is Gilbert doesn't do anything. You tell me right now, the Wake Forest series was put together by Confer.
Conference.
The state series was put together by Confer. The Boise State series that was canceled by Gilbert was put together by Confer, and I couldn't stand Confer. The BYU series was actually initially put together by Terry Holland. So, what has John Gilbert done in terms of scheduling? Now, I will, put the caveat in there. Things have changed. It's not as easy to schedule now as it was, but you see other Group of Five schools um, scheduling Power Five opponents, and Gilbert, unless I'm missing something, the only Power Five opponents he scheduled has been bye games, and anybody can get a bye game. So my problem isn't so much with the Western Carolina as a one-off. My problem is Gilbert is not impressive with scheduling overall, and that's the bigger issue. It's not the game against Western Carolina. It's who the hell has he signed that's impressive in terms of a home and home or a 2-for-1 or anything like that. Hell, I would at this point be excited about an extension to the Appalachian State series. I mean, I'm being real. I mean, we dropped Boise to play Coastal. I don't have a problem with playing Coastal. Why the hell did we drop that 2-game series with Boise?
And here's
And that kind of crap. And
yep.
I don't care. Look, people at the athletic department can be mad at me. I don't care. But I'm being critical of Gilbert on things that need to be criticized. And from a and from me, and he'll say, I'm quite sure if he sees this, he'll go, well, you think it's that easy? You schedule. Well, I'm not making $400,000 a year, neither do I have
Yeah,
the title
five.
of athletic director.
Try five, but who's
Yeah,
counting?
five. Well, whatever. It's 499 too much.
Well, listen, and here's the thing. You look at, and Kyle, you and I agree. I can live with the one FCS. Okay, my concern is this: we, East Carolina University, are a national brand. And before you laugh at me, look at the 1990s when Dave Hart scheduled after the Peach Bowl. We had a great
No, I don't even talk
national.
about Dave Hart.
I know, but just hear me out. I'm not going down that path. But Dave Hart schedules nicely on ESPN those Thursday night games, even though I'm not a fan of Thursday night because I think we may have won one. But you want to talk about the national exposure at that time, right? I'm not saying do things like that because that was the 1990s. What I'm saying is we are a national brand. So I have no issues with opponents we're playing other than we need more of national schedule especially in the landscape of college football, when you know that if you play a Boise State, guess what? We can go out there, they can come here. And somebody say, well, I know, Kyle, you can say we don't do recruiting in Boise, but there's a lot of eyeballs that will watch it that maybe not want to look.
We'll just bring it to real time. You don't even have to reference the 90s. What would you say is if not your favorite, one of your favorite wins of the Mike Houston era?
Mike Houston era. Well, I would say probably the bowl game because we hadn't won a bowl in 10 years.
Okay,
BYU.
You're there. BYU. There you go. BYU. That's what I'm looking for.
That's
BYU on Friday night on ESPN, way out in Provo, Utah, got us all kinds of national attention when we beat BYU. We like that. That's who we are. Not that Boise State is fighting up, but it's a brand name. We get excited for that. That's ingrained in who we are as East Carolina. It is something that I don't think, and I'm not sitting here saying, look, I think you would want to play 4 Power Five opponents a year if you could, but I'm not saying do that at all. But I do think, you got to play one or two a year. And in 27, we are playing Wake Forest. My bigger question is, again, specifically for that year, that was asked about Western Carolina. Who's that fourth opponent going to be? Because we got Georgia State, Wake Forest, Western Carolina. Who's that fourth opponent going to be?
Well, here's if you look at that, and here's my question is, we're in the year 2024, and we still have one opponent left. You can argue who came off the schedule and all that kind of stuff, and BYU and all that. You can make that. But anyway, let's look at 2029. We have Old Dominion and Liberty. That's all we have. 2031, we have Old Dominion is all we have. And you say, well, Dave, that's 7 years. But you don't understand. These schedules get filled up faster and faster and faster than they ever have. And that's my concern is we're going to be filling them with games of teams. We're just desperate. We got to put these, it's almost like we're independent again. So you look at 2025, next year is decent because you have at NC State, Campbell, at Coastal Carolina, big game. Maybe Kyle and I, we can ride down there together. We love that stadium and everything with Myrtle Beach. And then we have a home game with BYU. So next year is not bad. You look at 2026, Central, home game. Appalachian State, home game. West Virginia, home game at Old Dominion. I can live with that 2026 schedule all day long. But you're right.
How much you want to bet that West Virginia game never happens?
It may not. We'll see. We'll see.
You said Central. NC Central.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
NC Central. Decent. 28 is NC State, home, Coastal Carolina, Charleston Southern, and at Wake Forest. That's not bad. I can live with that. 30 is Norfolk State, at South Carolina, at Old Dominion. We'll see what the fourth opponent. But if you look at 2029, only two, and you can say, Dave, so what they're going to do is they'll have an FCS opponent, and that might be the year of the bye game is what I'm thinking for 29. We'll see. But anyway, Chuck says, why not schedule mid-tier power programs, Vandy, Syracuse? I'm all for that. I know.
Well, you got to get them to play you. I mean, they got to be willing to play you. I mean, I'm assuming you mean home and home. At this point, I'd do a 2-for-1. I think it's just the reality. If they want to do it, that would be great. You got to find people that want to play you, and you got to have an AD who can make things happen.
Yeah.
Terry Holland.
Yeah, you look at it, it's not. Look, let me tell you something right now. This show, there's many different examples I can give that we make things happen. If my children need something, I make it happen. I don't say, well, gosh, guys, I know you need the glasses, but I can't afford those glasses because, I just have one income coming in. No, what I do is I work harder. I have side hustles. I make more money, promotions at work, raises, different things like that, bonuses, everything, DJ, and everything I can put in the pot, I'm going to do it. And that's the problem is we can't have a small time mentality. If you think we're a small school, then you're not going to work as hard as if you think you're at Alabama or Tennessee. I'm not trying to knock you. I actually like John Gilbert. I like Ryan Robinson a lot, both of them a lot. It has nothing to do whether I like them personally or not. All I'm saying is, as a guy who's growing in the Pirate Club, I'm giving I'm giving as much money as I can. I can't give any more than I'm giving. I'm giving the max I can give. And I want, when we have these conversations about growing, then, you need to listen to the people that are your customers. And the other thing is, I'll add to you, Kyle, to your point, Kyle, about these brand name teams. We have people that we know, some of them, Kyle, and some that are my personal friends that, we go back to East Carolina. What they do is they look at they're not like Kyle and I, they look at the schedule. And if it's an attractive schedule, meaning the Power Fives and the teams that they would like to see to play the Pirates, then they buy season tickets. They buy individual tickets. But if it's just, hey, we expect you to come because it's East Carolina, that's not going to happen at our school. So what you have to do is, before we had to schedule we're going after the best. I'm not asking for that. That was crazy. The schedule, murderer's row, because we're independent. I'm not asking for that. But what I'm asking for is, when you look at the schedule and you say, in this year, we have those 4 non-conference teams. We can't control the conference we're in as far as those teams, but we can control the non-conference. And it does matter, and it's going to matter even more, I believe, in the playoff. I could be wrong, but if we have an easy schedule or a very watered-down schedule, I think it's
And
going to matter.
I'll point to Liberty last year and maybe disagree with you on that, but the key's going to be to go undefeated or near undefeated. So
And win the
it'll
conference
depend.
championship.
It'll depend. That's all subjective. I mean, while we don't have a Power Five opponent on the schedule this year, if we were to go 11-1 and win the conference, somebody would have to be pretty stout at 12-0 to get the playoff spot over us. But I mean, I doubt we're going to be in those discussions. Just saying.
Well, we'll have to wait and see how that goes, my friend. I definitely think we're going to, as Chuck says, thank you, Chuck. I remember that very well. 1985, we're going after the best. My first semester at ECU, and it was, as Coach Logan put it, 9 homecomings they played every year. But that's what we had to do to fund to be a Division I school. And as I've said before, what are we going to do if you're Leo Jenkins? What would Leo do? He and Pat Dye decided, hey, we're not going to be what was FCS then. We're moving up, and I think it was in 77. We're moving up to FBS, what we call FBS now, Division 1A football. And, yes, things have changed. Times have changed. The money of what we would have to invest. I'm not saying necessarily that I expect us to be in the top tier as we talked about with David Glenn, but I do think there's a lot of growth and room for us to grow and to be dominating the American. We got to start somewhere when it comes to the one missing link. And I promise, Kyle, I'm not going on a tangent here, but we've got to do better and spend more money on basketball, because I believe that all the other sports, you look at volleyball, Kyle, they have their volleyball schedule out now, and they have a chance for the first time in program history. They've never made the NCAA tournament. You remember they went the equivalent of the NIT last year in volleyball. Yeah. But in the 5th year, the coach has them where they have a chance now to make it to the NCAA tournament. And before that was just a nice thought. Oh, yeah, our ladies are going to make it to the NCAA tournament. And now it's more of a reality. Why? Because of I will say for Gilbert and Robinson, I will say their coaching hires have been really good. Even with Schwartz. I like Schwartz a lot. I think it comes down to not the coaching. So I want everybody to know how much I like him personally. He's been very good to me professionally, and to the media. He's been very, very nice. But I wanted to say it's not about the coaching. It's about the investing in the individual sport of basketball. We are spending more money, so I'll be fair to them, but we've got to spend a lot more money if we're ever going to be in the top tier of the American in basketball. Here's another great point. Kyle, softball under Shane Winkler. Softball's making a comeback. You know why? Because of the dude knows about, not only is he a great recruiter, he knows how to work the transfer portal. One of the best at East Carolina, hands down for sure.
Yep, no doubt. Dave, you about ready to wrap this up?
I am. I was getting ready. You read my mind. I was getting ready to ask you if you had any final thoughts before we get out of here, my friend.
Long summer. Going to be a lot going on between now and the August. What the hell is August 31st? We play Norfolk State.
Yep.
So
media days. In fact, the first practice of fall camp will be early August.
Yep.
And of course, we'll be at media day for you. And I hope that we can get our friend. I was going to make the joke, Kyle from Goldsboro, because everybody in basketball is changing their name now on our team. So, do you want me to be David from Richmond, or who do you want me to be? What do you want my name to change to?
We'll go with Dave.
Okay, just change it to Dave.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll get out of here. Thank you so much for DG, David Glenn, for being with us. And he always likes to stay with us, and I appreciate that very much. And we'll be with you maybe once a week at best during the summertime. But Kyle, my friend, I appreciate you coming, and we'll see you guys next time. And as always, as we like to say, go Pirates.
You're watching The Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates.